Mark Twain once described the period of time between Reconstruction and the 1900s as the Gilded Age of politics. After all, gilded metals appear to be very valuable with their shiny, gold-like surfaces, but a closer look reveals their cheap bases. America, too, seemed to have entered a time of prosperity and progress, specifically in the 1890s, as the U.S. transitioned from the end of the Gilded Age to the initial markings of the Progressive Era. Many individuals assume that the 1890s were in fact a time of progress and development for America during this time of transition, blinded by the illusions of reform and the hints of a developing American culture. But they don't see the truth. They don't see past the illusions of progress provided by the expansion of government regulation to businesses, the emerging political parties, and the statement the U.S. makes in wars fought during the 1890s. They don't see the true colors of the 1890s. The question is, do you? On the outside, the 1890s appeared to be the decade of change that America so desperately desired.
However, in reality, the decade was cloaked in a facade of progress established by the
Sherman Antitrust Act, Wounded Knee Massacre, renewal of the Chinese Exclusion Act, and other deceivingly progressive actions.
Yet underneath this facade lay the startling truth that America was still controlled by a fear of too much governmental power
and struggling to establish a coherent identity throughout the entire nation.
During the 1890s, the government was still trying to figure out how much to interfere with certain issues, especially the Indians regarding their relocation and cooperation within the Indian reservation system. For instance, in 1890, Sitting Bull, leader of the Hunkpapa Lakota, was murdered in a confrontation at the Standing Rock Reservation. Lakota police attempted to arrest him during this confrontation, which is part of a federal crackdown on the Ghost Dance movement.
The Ghost Dance movement began in 1889 and was centered around the prophet Wovoka's vision. In these prophecies, Wovoka promised followers that
through proper ceremony and supernatural magic, an end to federal expansion in the West will come, so they could return to living peacefully on their native lands. Many joined the Ghost Dance movement because they did not want to assimilate into Western society.
The government acknowledged this threat through the Wounded Knee Massacre on December 29, 1890. The Battle of Wounded Knee took place in South Dakota. This was actually the last major battle between the United States troops and the Plains Indians, specifically the Sioux.
The plan is to disarm the members of the Pine Ridge Reservation. Got it?
Got it.
The cavalry troops started the dispute, and during the battle, hundreds of Indian men, women, and children were slain, including 29 soldiers. The site of the battlefield is now a National Historic Landmark. The 1890s American government was testing its powers and interference levels at the time. But obviously, the Wounded Knee Massacre reveals that the government was not radically improving during this time and learning how to manage all tasks appropriately. Further evidence of the government taking on a progressive appearance but failing to execute its goals appropriately occurred with the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890.
Now, the Sherman Antitrust Act on July 2, 1890, will be the first federal statute to limit cartels and monopolies to prevent artificial raising of prices by restriction of trade or supply. But Mom, why do they want to regulate monopolies?
Well, monopolies have produced a class of very powerful men, and their interests don't really align with the rest of us in society. And as these powerful men grew more powerful, the people began to resent them more and more due to their manipulative tactics and domination of industries. This made the people urge the government to restrict monopolies, and guess what? The government did.
Oh, okay.
So what does the government's new Sherman Antitrust Act do?
Well, it forbids any combination or conspiracy in the restraint of trade.
I heard the government is already having problems because the act does not distinguish between good and bad trusts.
I heard that also.
The act ultimately proved to be ineffective, as the ambiguously worded act left many legal loopholes for corporations, lawyers, and the pro-business Supreme Court to exploit. Labor unions, especially, took a hard hit from this act. In fact, it wasn't until 1914 when the Clayton Antitrust Act was passed, which made allowances for collective bargaining, that this loophole was fixed.
So we thank Congress for the supposedly radical act that would regulate businesses and protect society from monopolies that in reality did very little. The lack of success of the Sherman Antitrust Act further emphasizes that the claim that the 1890s was a time of progress and productive development is in fact just an illusion.
The Forest Reserve Act was Congress's next move, which authorized the setting aside of public forests in any state or territory in an effort to preserve the timber supply for the future. This was the first step in the process of placing more western lands in the federal government's hands, thus making these lands less available for private purchase and use. This resulted in the federal government adjusting priorities slightly.
We need to prioritize the managing of public resources by employing projects ranging from land development to land conservation instead of selling public land.
I completely agree. The government needs to regulate these areas more.
There's a big difference between people who want to protect the environment.
Yep, big difference.
Conservationists, for example, want to protect the environment but also conserve it for human use.
Preservationists want to preserve the land without human interaction.
Congress, we need to establish Yosemite as a national park. We can call it Yosemite National Park. It is crucial that we preserve its sequoia forests. In addition to his role in the establishment of Yosemite National Park, Muir also created the Sierra Club in 1892, which was one of the first large organizations that was devoted to conservation within the United States. Roosevelt further expanded environmental protection of the West through national parks.
Although the opening of Ellis Island paints the 1890s as a period of growth and opportunities, the 1890s were not in fact a period of prosperity. The opening of Ellis Island did symbolize a change in that prior to its opening, the majority of immigrants came from Northern and Western Europe, and after came from Southern and Eastern Europe. However, Ellis Island was not all welcoming and celebratory, as many immigrants were detained for days or weeks before being allowed to pass through, if allowed.
Also during 1892 was the opening of the first Ellis Island immigration station. On the first day, 700 immigrants passed through Ellis Island, and in the first year, nearly 450,000 immigrants passed through the island.
The American frontier is gone, and as a result, the first period of American history has come to an end. The frontier played a major role in shaping American character, defining the spirit of America, fostering democracy, and providing a safe place to flee to in an effort to get away from the stress of urban industrial society.
Although the American frontier had indeed officially come to an end, rapid change did not immediately happen right after the census, thus making the census and thesis less progressive and change-invoking than it appears to be. The Populist Party formed out of the People's Party in Cincinnati, Ohio, in 1891. And the following year, Cleveland beat the People's Party candidate, James Weaver, although populism had just begun.
Well, you know the Populist Party originated with the Grangers, right?
What? No way.
Yeah, first there were the Grangers, who were mainly farmers who wanted to form a co-op and purchase farming materials together to reap the benefits of economies of scale. Then they died out due to a lack of money.
Oh my golly, who's next?
Well, then there were the Farmers' Alliance, who were more successful than the Grangers and eventually grew into the People's Party, which then sparked the populist movement.
Populists wanted free silver, a graduated income tax, government ownership of all forms of transportation and communication, direct election of senators, etc. Although these values were progressive and populism spread throughout the country, populists did not achieve all of their goals, and thus the progressive ideals were not the reality of the 1890s.
Congress, on the other hand, did seem to be getting somewhere with its goals. Specifically, it extended the Chinese Exclusion Act for an additional 10 years through the Gary Act of 1892, adding a requirement that all individuals of Chinese descent acquire and carry identification papers, which doesn't seem very transformative and progressive to me.
Did you hear? The workers at Carnegie's Homestead Steel Factory went on strike.
No, what were they thinking?
Yeah, Frankie locked the workers out after their contract expired, and then went as far as to hire replacement workers. And then to top it off, he called in the Pinkerton Detective Agency force to prevent the steel workers from protesting.
What happened after that?
Some people died, so then the Pinkertons retreated and everything, and the Pennsylvania State Militia was called in to end the fight. There were also new employees brought in to replace the strikers.
Wow, what a strike!
It was quite a strike, but still not exactly an image of a change-filled 1890s that many foolishly cling to, as the strike did not result in the change that was so desperately desired. But the major sign that the 1890s was not in fact a time of beneficial transition and prosperity was the 4-year financial crisis that occurred after Cleveland took office in 1893. I don't understand why everyone's so invested in populism and its goals.
I think it's because of the difficult economic times going on, which is spreading populism due to the populist demand for easy money, along with other radical movements.
What also captured the public's interest were the scandalous muck-raking articles mainly featured in McClure's magazine. The term muckrakers was pioneered by Theodore Roosevelt. Have you read this new article? It's quite scandalous.
No, I haven't.
These authors expose corruption within city government, the Senate, big business, and many industries. They're called muckrakers.
Although muckrakers did help create an atmosphere of reform by exposing the evils within society, they weren't always the most reliable sources of information, as there was no method of fact-checking news stories at the time, and the magazine thrived on digging up scandals to keep the public on its toes. thus making these articles not the groundbreaking, corruption-fighting information sources they are often made out to be. Another very obvious counterexample of progress would be the financial panic of 1893. The Depression would last for 4 years. We are pleased to announce that the World's Columbian Exposition is coming to Chicago, Illinois in 1893. After competing with the candidate cities of New York, Washington, D.C., and Missouri, Chicago has been awarded this amazing opportunity. The Chicago World's Fair is expected to have 25 million in attendance, with a total cost arriving at about $27 million. And why should you come? The fair will include a moving sidewalk and may also have the first sightings of picture postcards. Many people are considering this to be the greatest national event in American history. You should too, but don't wait. The fair will last only 6 months, with the final date being October 30th, 1893. Purchase your tickets soon. Come purchase your tickets now from your local vendor. Please note that purchase of a singular ticket can cause spinning at 90-degree angles, an odd desire for rare cheeses, snapping, death by tripping, shivering to the beat of another one bites the dust, irregular hiccuping, and more. Tickets start at 50 cents a piece. Shipping and handling fees are there, so they're there. Call 1-800-CHICAGO today to get your tickets.
There were several different causes for the financial panic of 1893. Basically, there was a rapid increase in railroad lines that created an illusion of growth in the economy as a whole. Then, banks and investors further contributed to this inaccurate image with fast-paced investment in industry and other related businesses. Railroads began to fail as a result of the expenses coming in faster than the returns on their construction, which resulted in the failure of businesses entangled with the railroads, such as the banks and steel mills, which ultimately created a ripple effect throughout the economy. In only 1 year, unemployment increased from 3% to around 19% of all working-class Americans. There were 3 million American workers unemployed when the Depression was at its worst.
The Depression left a dark stain in the period of prosperity that America had appeared to enter. Right after the economic turbulence, people sought relief from those they elected in government.
Please, sir, please. I just need a job and some way to get food for my family. I voted for you. Please, sir, can you help me? No.
The government was not able to provide the jobs and aid they sought, forcing these Americans to look elsewhere. In 1894, Congress, on the other hand, was ready to make some changes, or so they claimed.
In 1894, Congress revived a previous graduated income tax on August 28th, which passed most likely because America was in a depression and knew that its revenues would not be enough supported by tariffs and duties alone. This act was known as the Wilson-Gorman Tariff Act, which basically imposed a 2% flat tax on income that exceeded $4,000, along with corporations and certain associations. It would have been a major progressive move, as the act taxed those who could afford to pay more. But in 1895, the Supreme Court voted on the unconstitutionality of the direct tax.
Since direct taxes or taxes on property are considered unconstitutional, an income tax applied to rents earned on real property is an unconstitutional direct tax. All those in agreement say aye.
Aye.
I'm so glad we finally got the progressive income tax we needed. Such a blessing.
Well, you do realize that it wasn't actually very radical, because the Supreme Court declared parts of it unconstitutional and then the entire statute, since enforcing the remaining parts of the law would be inconsistent with Congress's intent.
But not everyone was ready to submit to authority. The infamous Pullman strike occurred in 1894. The Pullman Company made railroad cars and was owned by George Pullman. The factory operated in the company town of Pullman, Illinois, where workers rented homes from George and shopped at the company store that he owned, thus making unemployment equivalent to eviction. And while George made some bold decisions.
All 2,000 of you are fired. The 3,000 of you left, your wages are getting reduced.
The Pullman workers responded to this harsh treatment by going on strike. The American Railway Union, led by Eugene V. Debs, joined the strike in May, which led to over 250,000 railway workers walking off the job, specifically refusing to handle any train that had Pullman cars on it, which effectively shut down rail travel in 27 states. President Cleveland attempted to put an end to the strike by sending federal troops under the pretenses of protecting delivery of federal mail, and sent a court injunction to prohibit interference, but Debs was a stubborn man.
I sent in the army to put an end to this absurdity, yet still you refuse to see reason. Mr. Debs, you must put an end to this strike at once because it is disrupting the delivery of federal mail.
Cleveland, what you ask of me I cannot do.
Arrest the man at once.
Debs was convicted and jailed for refusing to obey a court order. While in jail, Debs supposedly became obsessed with Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. and when he was released from prison, he became an active member in the socialist movement to eventually take on the title of the leader of the American Socialist Party. Another attempt to combat the devastation left by the Depression of 1893, in 1894, the businessman Jacob Coxey led a march of unemployed Ohioans from Cincinnati to Washington, D.C. The leaders of the group pressed Congress to pass public works legislation in which the federal government would hire unemployed workers to build roads and other public projects. The march grew from 100 to 500 as others joined along the way to the nation's capital. When they arrived, their demands were ignored and several marchers were arrested for trespassing on the grass outside the Capitol. This frustrating event prompted many infuriated workers to consider or even join the Populist Party during the elections that followed. What seemed to be the key to progress and change arrived when Theodore Roosevelt became the president of the New York City Police Board in 1895, thus making him the police commissioner. Theodore Roosevelt exemplified major efforts to reform the police department, while heightening his public profile. His reforms regarding crime and corruption further increased his popularity with the people of New York.
Although Booker T. Washington, who was a Southern black born into slavery, did see this particular decade as a chance to enact change for blacks.
Integration and equal rights in this atmosphere and society will not happen anytime soon, as whites are not ready to accept blacks as equals. So instead of spending our time trying to enact change a few decades early, we need to gain economic rights first. Economic independence needs to come before voting rights and equal rights so that blacks can approve their lot and gain their political rights.
In order to pursue his goals, Washington established the Tuskegee Institute, which was a vocational and industrial training school for blacks, although some accuse him of being an accommodationist.
Booker T is succumbing to white power by refusing to press for immediate rights. In addition, he is essentially confirming the white social hierarchy of gaining economic rights over political rights.
Washington's famous speech occurred in 1895.
Black progress can be achieved and will be achieved through education and entrepreneurship, directly challenging the Jim Crow segregation and disenfranchisement of Southern black voters will not get us anywhere, as whites will never accept blacks as equal. But if we work for our economic rights, the political rights and acceptance will come.
His rival was W.E.B. Du Bois, who advocated for political rights before economic ones, on the contrary. He was not the biggest fan of Washington's speech.
Washington's speech was submissive and really a compromise. The Atlanta Compromise. Hello, ladies. Look at your man. Now back to me. Now back to your man. Now back to me. Sadly, he isn't me. But if he stopped using lady-scented body wash and switched to Old Spice, he could smell like he's me. Look down. Back up. Where are you? You're on a deck overlooking the water with the man your man could smell like. What's in your hand? Back at me. I have. It's 2 tickets to a Spanish-American War reenactment. Look again. The tickets are now diamonds. Anything is possible when your man smells like Old Spice and not a lady. In April of 1896, gold was discovered near Dawson, Canada, setting up the Klondike Gold Rush, which would cause a boom in travel and gold fever from Seattle to Alaska. It was the last great Western rush for riches. Discovery of gold in the Yukon, Canadian and American, and in South Africa increased the supply of gold, which had the effect of making money more plentiful and increasing the price that farmers received for their goods.
On May 18, 1896, the Plessy v. Ferguson decision by the Supreme Court made waves.
Racial segregation is approved under the separate but equal doctrine, and thus the principle of Jim Crow laws in the segregated American South is legal.
Doesn't seem very progressive to me.
Election of 1896 pitted William Jennings Bryan, a Democrat with populist sympathies, and who advocated for the use of silver in the money supply, at a ratio of 16 ounces of silver to 1 ounce of gold, against Governor William McKinley of Ohio, who is associated with a highly protective tariff and gold standard.
A silver-based monetary system is crucial, and the government needs to coin more silver.
Who are you voting for?
I'm voting for Bryan because, like other populists, I want to see a candidate in the White House who will embody populist goals if not the party name.
I'm voting for McKinley because he said that protective tariffs would safeguard American jobs and enforce employee support. Oh, cool. Yeah.
When Bryan lost to Republican William McKinley, the Populist Party lost much of its momentum. As the country climbed out of the Depression, the interest in a third party faded away, although the reformist movement remained intact. This election was the end of the populist movement.
Well, Jim, now that populism has officially come to an end, I'm worried about how we will be represented with the bustling urban areas.
Tim, I completely understand. Our lack of modernity and wealth has made political activity extremely difficult.
But because McKinley is now president, the progressive ideas will lead to less separation between the wealthy and the poor, and the greater representation of America as a whole.
Wow, seeing how you already have so much information about the upcoming president, I must have nothing to worry about.
Yeah, American life should be a breeze from here.
President McKinley was inaugurated on March 4th, 1897 as the 25th President of the United States. The USS Maine is down. I repeat, the USS Maine is down. Over.
Oh dear, over.
Sir, the USS Maine is down in the Havana Harbor.
That's awful. I should probably address the people. The USS Maine has officially been declared as exploded and sunk in the Havana Harbor. 3/4 of the crew has passed, 216 men in total. The cause is currently unknown, but an undetected fire in one of the ship's coal bunkers has forced those to believe the cause is the Spanish.
The blockade of Cuba began on April 22, 1898, when American Navy aided independent forces within Cuba. The next day, Spain declared war on the U.S. after rejecting America's ultimatum to withdraw from Cuba. Several days later, the U.S. declared war on Spain, stating that they originally did on April 20th. Finally, on May 1st, the United States destroyed the Spanish fleet in the Philippines.
The U.S. successfully defeated the Spanish in the Philippines, Melania Bay, Puerto Rico, and Guam.
The Spanish-American War came to a close with the Treaty of Paris, in which Spain granted Cuba independence and gave the U.S. the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. The Teller Amendment was adopted, in which the U.S. claimed it would not annex Cuba after Spain's departure from the island in 1898, yet U.S. troops remained in Cuba for another few years, foreshadowing the Platt Amendment.
We are gathered here today to honor the passing of the belief that the 1890s was a decade of change and progress. Those illusions are gone, cold, done. Today is a day for remembering a misunderstood decade, as the 1890s was not the decade of change that it appeared to be from the outside looking in. Despite claims of progress, growth, and change, this decade was in fact too similar to the gilded medals associated with the time period.
Even by the 1890s, after the Civil War, War of 1812, and even the Revolutionary War, America was still paralyzed by a fear of too much governmental power and a loss of control,
As evident by the limited power of the Sherman Antitrust Act, the renewal of the Chinese Exclusion Act, Wounded Knee Massacre, the U.S. role in the Spanish-American War, etc.
The fact is that during the 1890s, the U.S. was still trying to find itself and establish a coherent identity throughout the nation.
The 1890s may have been a step in the right direction towards progress, but it was not, in fact, the progressive, change-invoking decade it is sometimes made out to be.
Today, many individuals still consider the 1890s, the closing of the Gilded Age, to be a symbol of progress. But those individuals do not see the true colors of the 1890s. The question is, do you?
G5 Soldier.
Oh my gosh, you guys, you want to know? I came up with a nickname for Ice Cubes.
Okay, you can tell us after you do the sheet.
wait, real quickly.
Who comes up with a nickname for ice cubes?
Are you ready? H2O croutons.
This is such a big word speech.
Yeah, because he wrote
There are
it.
huge words in okay.
Got it. Easy.
Progressive. Citizenship.
Good.
Ship.
And also
Close the door. Action.
Go. It looks so stupid.
Okay, now just look at Haley and pretend like you're having a conversation.
Ryan
Or you
is
can-
so hot.
You're so weird.
I love Ryan.
What are you
Don't be
doing?
smiling because you're supposed to be serious.
Ryan is so hot, and I love him. I have to confess my love.
That is so weird.
I think that you are so weird.
Oh, really? You want to have a conversation about weirdness?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I can beat you up.
No.
Okay, I think that's.
Is against the assimilation of Native Americans into society and woman culture. I can't read it in my test.
It's Cloud Central. Wait, no.
This is so weird. No laughing. Don't be Haley. Do you want no pants?
Looks like a man and dog.
No!
That was so good!
Back at me, I have. It's so awkward. Do you think it's your costume? No!
That was one.
Twice. Tough.
Twice.
Go home.
Okay, let's go.
He's gonna cry before I do.